Barbara oversees the operation and administration of the city's public library, as well as the Kenosha County Library System, including matters related to library and system policies, finances, facilities, and personnel. She works closely with library staff and key partners countywide to ensure progress is made with the library and library system long-term strategic goals and annual objectives. She serves on the leadership table for Building Our Future and as a Readers Are Leaders volunteer. Barbara is also a recognized leader in the professional library community, serving as board chair for Wisconsin Library Services. Okay, we've had a very rocky start, but hopefully it's going to be smooth sailing here on out. So sorry, Barbara. Usually we're much more professional than this.
Oh, no, this is great. No worries.
Sorry for the hiccups, but
We've all been there, Robin. We have all been there.
It's been a crazy couple weeks. So we're super excited to have you because as I know you know, our libraries have been under attack, whether it's our school libraries or our public libraries. So we are super excited to have you here to talk to us about our public libraries and all that you do. So I'm going to be quiet now and let you take it away. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. There's no better subject for me to talk about than public libraries. And I love that you suggested that they're the cornerstone of our democracy, because I think that's a terrific compliment, and I hope that we can live up to it. I am going to talk to you today about how we do live up to that. And I'm also going to talk to you about our challenges and how we have not lived up to this. Not historically. I could go on for hours if we talk about it that way. But I do want first thank you, because it has been a joy to watch your membership defend public libraries on stage for the past couple of years in Kenosha County. And I really, really appreciate that. So I hope you get something out of this, some more tidbits to back you up if people come up to you and say crazy things or things just aren't true. So hopefully we can get a few facts in your hands that you didn't know about before. But it's nice to talk to a group that already thinks the public libraries are the cornerstone of our democracy. Whoa, see, it's not just you. I'm going to try to move this forward. Here we go. Okay. One of my favorite books that was written in the past few years is called Palaces for the People. Eric Kleinenberg is a sociologist, and he was at the University of Chicago. I'm not sure he still is, but he wrote this fabulous book because for his PhD work, he studied why some people survive a disaster and some people don't. And he was looking at the neighborhoods in Chicago during a very high heat wave and how they had such a high level of people who survived it and did well and made it through. And then in other cities, it doesn't work so well. And so he really looked into this, and he's talking about social infrastructure. And I think that's what we're talking about tonight. The public library is just one example of social infrastructure. We used to invest in it a whole lot more than we do now. Unfortunately, we've been starved for many years now, but he proved that his social infrastructure actually, what he says, can help fight inequality, polarization, and the decline of civic life. And if you read the book, it even gets down into how this kind of social infrastructure can save a life during disasters, because people know each other through these social interactions, and they take care of each other in a crisis. And so libraries are uniquely democratic. There's just no two ways about it. And the reason I say that is that this is a great quote from Nancy Cranich, who used to run the American Library Association. In America, libraries exist in order to give all people equal access to learning and self-determination. We sort of take that for granted in the United States. I'm sure many of you are travelers the way that I am, and I notice public libraries when I'm in other countries. I have relatives in Ecuador now, and so when I'm in Ecuador, I realize that they do have public libraries, but they're very academic. It's almost like they've opened up some academic titles to a population where the literacy rate is pretty low. So not a lot of people can get a lot out of that. It's not very democratic. And I spent a few days in Hanoi a few years ago in Vietnam. And they had a public library too, but I can guarantee you that the books inside that library were all vetted by the government, what someone is allowed to read and what they're not allowed to read. Interestingly enough, I moonlighted when I worked in Illinois at a library in Wheeling, and they have a high population of Russian refugees and at that time and immigrants, and they had a very interesting view of the public library. They expected all of the books in that library to be vetted by the government. I thought that was very interesting, and it was something that we tried to overcome with them, that there was free access to information, not just what the government allowed you to read. So we should really, not take this for granted. And this is the most important reason why I stand up for the right to read. And I stand against the government telling us what is accessible to anyone in the public library, because this is the United States and that's not the way it works. So if you read my statement, you'll know that that's what I mean. So James Madison said this lovely thing, people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power knowledge gives, right? And so it's this knowledge-based society that a public library really is the engine of, because once you've done your schooling, you're done, but you cannot stop learning and you cannot stop being, informed so that you can to be a good citizen and participate in democracy. Who knew this, of course, was Andrew Carnegie there on the left, and our own Zalman Simmons, who coughed up the money to build the Simmons Library in Kenosha. These two industrialists understood that to be a successful business, you needed educated people working for you. And that's why they invested in the public library. And I think that Mr. Carnegie also realized, as an immigrant to the United States, that democracy wasn't something that we could just take for granted. And so he understood that an educated population also meant that democracy would be stronger. One thing that I wanted to bring up tonight is that whole idea of prescriptive libraries. Think of that like, your doctor gives you a prescription. This is what you need to take. Public libraries started out as prescriptive way back in the days of Benjamin Franklin. They put things in a library that the people who ran the library said you should read for your own edification. But we don't do that. That's a religious library, for instance. A church library, it's going to have a prescriptive collection. But we don't do that in a public library because we serve everything. That's to serve everyone. But that doesn't mean that it's just willy-nilly and that whatever is published we put into the collection. We've always had these 5 criteria that we look for in a book before we add it to the collection. And the first one, of course, is authority. What does the author know anything about this subject, for instance? And accuracy, of course, and all these other things. I do have that handout. I'm not sure that your membership was able to had access to this, but you can find any of these charts that I'm going to show you tonight. They're done by the Wisconsin Library Association in response to book banning, just to make sure that people understand that there is a process for how we select. You'll hear the naysayers say, accuse me of being the one who reads the books and then decides whether I like them or not, and then puts them in the collection. Believe me, I have no time to read 20,000 books a year that we add into the collection, nor would I ever screen them that way. This is a decision based on a lot of criteria that, that's vetted by experts. what's coming out, what has a good review, and again, does the author know anything about this or have anything to say? There's also popular stuff in our collection, obviously. You've all used the public library and you understand that as well. We even have an Office for Intellectual Freedom at the American Library Association, because this number 2 great reason why we're the cornerstone of democracy is what you have witnessed lately. We ensure that the freedom of speech and the freedom to read and the freedom to view is maintained for the population. It's not an easy thing to do, obviously. This is where we take the most hits about what we do. I don't think anybody has any problem with the fact that these libraries are packed with tutoring after school or computer use, people trying to get jobs online, all the tech help that we provide. I think what they're really concerned about here is what's in our collection. And, you know, what we do is we create a collection of opposing viewpoints, as we should, so that people are thoughtful and they don't just read what they already believe, but they view other people's opinions and then, you know, check it against their own. Opposing viewpoints cause controversy. And you saw 2 pretty large controversies in the past year here. And again, I thank you for coming out, because it doesn't really matter what you think of homegoing, and it doesn't really matter whether you think that every book in our collection is appropriate. The whole underlying premise here is this is an issue of freedom. And the government does not decide what the public gets to read. We do accept book challenges, though, of course. We don't stand, you know, in front of someone who doesn't like what's in our library and say, oh, well, too bad. We have a whole process. So we have a form that people can fill out. Tell us why you disagree that the library should have this book. Most of the time, it's not that. It's this shouldn't belong in one particular place in the library versus another. One of the recent ones we had was a video that was a biography of Sonia Henne. If you remember her, she was a famous ice skater in the Olympics when most women, you know, weren't professional athletes. And the movie had, you know, it was a depiction of her life, and there was a scene of sexual violence. I think it just alluded to it. It wasn't extremely graphic, but it caught the patron by surprise. And she objected to the fact that we had it in the library and that it wasn't rated. Well, the thing is that it's a foreign film, and foreign films aren't rated. So, you know, that was our answer to her. It was won many awards. And, you know, there is no rating for a foreign film. So most of the time it is a simple, respectful reply. We bring together the librarians who chose the item to begin with. And so they can just, you know, do their research. This is why we did it. That had great reviews. It won, you know, best film at a film festival, whatever. And then, you know, we respond. If they don't like the answer and they want to take it to the higher level, then they take it to me. And if they don't like my answer, they can take it to the library board. And clearly the library board is a group of citizens that represent the public. And so that is, you know, that is what they can do. So if somebody says, you know, that it's all about what I like in the collection, or if somebody says, well, you know, the government should just decide what goes in what section of the library or what can be in there, just remind them that if there's one particular item in the collection that they don't agree with, they can fill out one of these, you know, one of these requests for reconsideration, we call it. And there is a process, and it's a thoughtful process. It isn't just like, well, we don't care what you think. It is a thoughtful process of this is why we chose it, and this is why we put it in what part of the library. And libraries encourage the development of a civil society. I love this statement. Obviously, we're not living in very civil times. This is where I think libraries kind of fall down. Well, we haven't done really well. And there's a reason for it. We have done well in the past. I have a great example from Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach used to be a kind of a sleepy little town on the ocean. And then developers came to town and wanted to make it a glitzy high-rise place. And there was a lot of friction between the people who lived there for a long time, for generations, and the new developers. And so the municipal government said, you know, we need to do something. And the public library stepped forward and said, well, why don't we hold some public dialogue about this so people can talk to each other and we can come to compromise. It worked so well that they used that town hall type of dialogue for a lot of their decisions now in Virginia Beach. And they even built a new building for it and created a new organization that runs that. So there are really good examples of that kind of thing. Where we have fallen down, of course, is that anything that reeks or suggests that we should talk to each other is labeled as this liberal agenda. And what libraries need to do is serve everyone. And so we take it very seriously that we aren't viewed as, you know, the quote liberal media, right? Like that we already are, but we try very hard to stay down the middle road of, you know, of civility. And so we kind of back away from this. A good example of that was John Meacham wrote a book called The Soul of America a few years back. And it was during the time when we had local elections, and we thought it was the most brilliant idea that as part of this big, it wasn't quite a big read, but it was like a community read of Soul of America, we should present some questions to the people who were running for office and say, you know, John Meacham says, you know, that in our history, we've learned how to overcome our differences. And he, you know, what do you think about that? Well, I was accused immediately of politicking, and that is, you know, against the law because we are a public institution. And I got called on the carpet by city administration who said, pull the questions. So that happens. And, you know, I didn't want to pull the questions, but I had a lot of pressure on me to do it. But that's a simple thing that keeps us from convening these kinds of things. There's something called Our Better Angels, and I know that Cameron Swallow is very interested in convening groups so that you select people who are sworn Democrats and people who are sworn Republicans, and you bring them into this kind of dialogue and with a moderator who knows how to handle it, and you talk to each other. But again, it's one of those things where we just get right down into the middle of it, and we start being accused of all kinds of political moves. So we haven't been very good at it, and we should do better. I can say that. Information literacy, also a place where we've fallen down. We did an amazing job back in the 1990s. I know you're all too young to remember that, but I was already a librarian when we got the World Wide Web. And we did an amazing job getting people in small towns and big towns up to speed on what is the internet, how do you find information. We did a terrific job. My generation only had access to information that was vetted, you know? It was like the World Book Encyclopedia was not just written by a bunch of people in a back room. These people knew their subjects, and we got used to that. Then we got onto the internet, and at first it was science and government information. And so we got used to, hey, everything on the internet is true, because it was at that point, right? It was all facts. But then, of course, it's morphed into something else. And now we have a generation that's all digital natives and they don't know the difference. And we've got a really serious problem where we can't tell the difference between fact and fiction. And a lot of people aren't even that interested in whether it's fact or fiction, which is worse. And my biggest fear now is AI's coming along. And it's going to be really hard to tell the difference now between fact and fiction. So this is an area where we haven't done well enough. We started out doing very well, but it's getting really, really murky with AI. And I worry for this because we are sitting ducks if we don't know the difference between fact and fiction, and worse if we don't care. This, however, is where we have done an amazing job, the public right to know, and that is access to government information. So I use the example of just try to find out what's on your ballot and where you can vote. But protecting scientific data from government purge was a big deal when Trump took office last time. I wish people remembered this. He immediately set out to purge any reference to climate science. And he said if it's a government entity, which of course is, all the big scientific information, scientists, all of that, you cannot mention climate science, you cannot mention global warming, none of that. Erase it, get rid of it. And so our heroic, and I mean heroic, scientists and librarians worked furiously day and night to make sure that they could capture that information, and they actually had a digital vault where they stuck this stuff to wait out this administration and restore it. They saved all that research that was wiped out from public view so that we would have access to it later. So that's my shining example of how librarians can be heroes. Locally, when there was that civil unrest in the summer of 2020, we went back into the Uptown neighborhood and sat down in some of those sessions where neighbors talked to each other and tried to find out from each other, what had gone wrong. And one thing that we were stunned to learn was that there was a very low voter turnout in the neighborhood. And the reason the residents said was because they didn't know who was on their ballot. They didn't know who these people were. They didn't know what they stood for. And very interestingly, and not surprisingly, they didn't know what some of these jobs were. What does the Secretary of State do? What does the Lieutenant Governor do? It didn't have any valid significance to them. So they just didn't vote at all. So the thing that we did immediately was we turned around and just put together a website or a web page on our site. It's called Research Register Vote, and we are updating that right now. So you get the one-stop shopping. You can figure out, who's on your ballot. You can register. You find out how to register to vote in this state. Clearly, you all know libraries can't register anybody to vote, which is really surprising. I used to have raise my right hand and register to people to vote in Illinois libraries. I don't know why we don't allow it here. But we've done that kind of one-stop shopping for everybody. So all of that is together. So that's a fine example of how we react to what people need. And then if you asked me, how do you describe public libraries? I'll always use that great equalizer. And yes, it is access to collections and information and all of that. But it's really about the information society. And we have done an amazing job with this as well. When the internet first came out, people didn't have they didn't have computers at home. They were incredibly expensive and nobody knew how to use them. But the public library, we all had them, right? And so you could come and you could learn all of that stuff. And it hasn't changed. And we really, on any day, you can come into Southwest Library. I'm just looking at my door right now. And every computer is filled. People still come to the library to use them. We give out hotspots and for them to use at home with laptops. and with data plans, because, you know, they don't have the data plan either. So we teach, we taught, what is it, 2,000 times last year? We sat down with people and who got new devices or just didn't know how to finish what they were doing online, and everything in between. And we teach them technology. So that's a great equalizer, because, you know, you can't apply for any job if you don't have some kind of computer skills, because that's how you apply these days. So it is a very big deal. And, you know, I'll also say lifelong learning. I mean, where else can you go, right? That you don't have to pay. It doesn't matter how you dressed. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. You don't even need to speak good English, right? You're welcome here. So we are the great equalizer, social infrastructure that holds us up. And I hope we don't take it for granted. That's all I can say. One thing I wanted to leave you with is this, and sometimes you'll hear people say libraries are neutral. And I kind of alluded to that earlier, is like why we don't do as much of that deliberative dialogue that we should. We're not neutral. We're not political. That there's a difference, right? But we're not neutral, because we are, as cornerstones of democracy, we face challenges and we stand up for the right to read, the right for everyone to have access that is unfettered, because the public library is for everyone. And you, I hope, will find something that really irritates you on our shelves, because we joke about that all the time. If there's nothing in the library that offends you, we haven't done our job, because information and ideas, they're out there and they're all over the place. But this is the place that you can come and you can explore that and hopefully improve your understanding of the world. So that's really what I brought today. And I'm open to any kinds of questions or anything that you want to talk about. I did not talk about censorship very much, and I know that there's a lot of curiosity about that. I can tell you that libraries are adored across the nation, and the vast majority of people do not want any kind of censorship, not just in their public libraries, but in school libraries. So it is a vocal minority that is driving all of this. So do not think that you're outnumbered. You're not. It's just a matter of who's loudest.
Well, thank you very much for all that great information. And I will open it if people want to ask a question. I know there's not a lot of us here because I think I screwed up on the Mobilize link, but I know there's some of us. And so I do have a question though. I
Yeah.
have a couple, but I'll start off with one. And that is, I'm just curious about, I guess you would call it membership. Like, do you see like your numbers of patrons and people checking out books? Like how has that like fluctuated through the years?
Well, the pandemic is what really hit us hard. I think our print collections were used less as people migrated to online or to digital, but it never even got to 50-50. Amazon has based their business around 50% print and 50% digital, and it's never been skewed any other way. In other words, people don't use digital more than they use print. Print is alive and well, and to stay. And so, you have to watch the people who are in it for the money. They know, right? For here, we took a big dip, obviously, in the pandemic, but we came back pretty strong, and we're already at 7% increase in 2024 over 2023. So we're zooming up. People use the library differently, though. I think they got, in the pandemic, they kind of got used to being detached a bit. And so they use our space physically. So our numbers of visits are way up, and our program numbers, we're breaking records. We've never had so many people coming to our programs, especially our children's programs. So people want to be together. People who work from home don't want to work from home all the time, so they use our spaces in that way. I mentioned computer use. I'm looking out there right now, like what's going on. And our meeting rooms are packed in the evening. So it's people coming together, or using our study rooms or whatever, just using our spaces more than ever. We just talked about that with a bunch of librarians from across the state. Somebody said that their municipality was questioning, their funding because their circulation was down. And they said, is that the case for everybody? And, we just know that, well, digital is up, and print is down slightly. But in Kenosha, print's pretty strong still. We have not risen to that level like, say, Seattle. Seattle was like early adopters, New York City early adopters of everything digital. So their numbers would be different than ours, but people are still married to the print here, and people are very interested in early literacy here. So we see a lot of circulation with children's books, which is always good news, right?
That's great.
Mm.
Lori asked, she said, first of all, thank you for all that you are doing. We appreciate you and your backbone. I'm wondering if you can let me know what we pro public library fans can say about what it would mean to people if books were segregated. Like,
I try to figure that, make some points in my statement. It's like, this is just not, it's unwieldy for one thing. And, everyone parents differently. When I was a kid, we had no young adult section in a library. I was either with the babies or you just graduated right to the adults. There was nothing in between. And this whole concept of the middle road with young adult really isn't that old. And I think I turned out okay. But I would just, read the Swashbucklers, I would just read anything I could get my hands on. And, the things that were kept behind, we all have these stories, right? There are things that were kept behind locked doors was the books about anatomy and, any kind of anything that might give you a picture of any kind of anatomical part. So we grew up in these prudish kind of times. It's crazy. If you think about a 17-year-old who wants to read a book, an adult level book, and they can't get into the adult level books. Because adult level just is a reading level thing, and it's an interest level thing. It isn't pornography, which, the naysayers like to equate adult collections with, porn stores. It's not the same thing. They've never, by the way, as we all know, they never complain about violence, which I clearly say as many times as I can, that rape is violence. It isn't sex, which just gives you, a key look into their character, that they think that rape is sex, then, there's something else going on there. So. Yeah, we already have children's sections, we have young adult sections, and we have adult sections. If they don't like something they think something shouldn't be in the children's section or the young adult section, there is a book challenge process that they can go through. And there have been times, I remember I moved a book when I worked in Colorado. I moved a book that was about Western migration, and there was a picture of a lot of dead buffalo stacked up. You probably know that picture that I'm referring to, where they were just massacring buffalo. And a parent came to me and said, this was just really surprising when we were reading this book, and it was really hard for my child to see. It was just really hurt him. And I thought, well, there's no harm in moving that into a young adult section because it felt like it was just, too graphic for a 5 or 6-year-old, so we did that. So we moved it up. But those are one at a time. You look at each one of these challenges and you make a judgment. Moving from one section of the library to the other usually doesn't bother me, but it's more like you should take it out because it offends me. That was a whole homegoing thing. And you ever notice the list of books that they want to take out are usually LGBT themed or African American protagonists. Usually what they're after.
I'm also curious as to what are the criteria for, like, is there any criteria for what kids under 18 can check out? Like, can anybody with a library card check out any book anywhere in the library? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Mhm. I've
And
never seen, and I have to say, I have never seen, and I think I'm on my 34th year as a librarian. I've never seen little kids peruse the adult shelves looking for a fiction book.
right,
Never,
yeah.
never. And if you're under 9, you can't be in the library by yourself anyway. You have to be with an adult. Yeah, this is all just manufactured stuff.
So this is a little bit of a different question, but it is a question that I have. Because I'm relatively kind of new to Wisconsin, and I'm curious about the whole idea. I came from a library system where they got rid of all library fines. Like there were no library fines. And at first, I remember when they did that, I was like, well, first of all, I was like, do you know, I have like supported the library when my kids were little, like all the little books that get like under the bed and under the couch, and you'd go home with a big stack and you'd return with like half of them and you end up buying the books. Um, and at first I thought it was not a terrible idea, but I just didn't understand how it was going to work. I was like, they're going to lose so much money. But then I just saw how books got returned. Like people return books when you're not saddled with this huge fine. And there were limits, if you had if they kept track of books that didn't get returned. And so if you had so many books that hadn't gotten returned, then you couldn't check out more, right? Like you could
Yeah.
either buy them off,
Mhm.
pay for them like you did before, or you
Mhm.
could go home and search between the cushions and find it and return the book. And I just thought it was such a brilliant idea. And I was just wondering if that's something you guys have ever considered. I feel like it is somewhat of a equity issue. Um, you
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
25 cents, I think your fine is like 25 cents a day. It adds up over time.
Yeah, it
So,
does. There is a maximum though, $5 for each.
oh, okay.
Okay.
I didn't know that. So thank
But
you for clarifying that.
and then it's just on adult stuff. So
Okay.
the entire children's collection, fine free. Okay.
Okay. Didn't know that. Thank you for
Right. And
clarifying
the
that.
re the reason by is that equity thing, because
Mhm.
we want to make sure the parents don't use the excuse of I can't afford it because you guys misplaced things.
Right.
So and we did that in 2016 and it's been great. We also do a lot of reminders and things like that now. So we don't collect anywhere near the fines that we used to because we give you grace periods. We do all kinds of things trying to get it. That we have to get it back though. And in our defense, the whole idea of fines was to make sure that the books came back. The reason being is that a lot of the books that go out are on a waiting list for the next person.
Mhm.
And if they don't come back, then you guys were waiting forever, and then we turn around and buy another copy when we could have just had it back and put it back into circulation. So that's always been the idea behind it. But make no mistake, there's also that idea of personal responsibility behind it. So,
Mhm.
there's a lot of people that are like real proponents of that, or not teaching them anything. I
Mhm.
mean, we heard it when we said no more, fines on kids' stuff. So, Yeah, there's that whole contingent too. We have not eliminated them all the way because you're right. We need the income,
Yeah.
and it's a couple, it's tens of thousands of dollars. So that's something we need, unfortunately.
So how can we best support our public libraries and our librarians in particular who seem to be on the I don't know, for the firing line? It's a terrible
They
saying, but
are. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Library directors are either quitting or getting fired all over the country, and I feel rotten for them. It's very important who gets on a library board. One of the most important things you can do, if you're willing to do it, is put your name on the list at the mayor's office to get on the library board, because there are finite terms, and we have to have new members every year anyway. So there's usually 2, sometimes 3 openings out of 9 every year. And we've had a very, very supportive mayor. I have gone to him on every time we kind of work out who I'd like to have on the board. And I'll go to him and I'll say, oh, I think this person would be great. And he knows the history of everybody. And he'll say, yeah, it's a great person, but that particular alder person has a problem with that person. And you don't want to be in the middle of that. You don't want to be in the middle of that fight. So he's really protected us, and made sure that the people who get on our board are pro-library and they aren't coming on with an agenda. Illinois is not that lucky because they're elected. And so, you can get people that are anti-tax on your library board and you've got a lot of problems. And that's usually what's happening out there in the country, is they're elected or they are appointed by a very conservative government who's anti intellectual freedom, which can be a problem too. But locally, the mayor appoints, and I don't know who will be our mayor next. Both candidates seem to be pro-library, so I'm not very worried about it. But I'm not sure they'll be so attentive to who gets on boards, because Mayor Antaranium had a lot of experience with this, and I'm sure he learned the hard way about what to do. So that would be an excellent way to help out in that way. You can also get on the county board, although the state statutes really determine the majority of that board. One has to be a county supervisor appointed by the county executive, and 3 of them have to be appointed to that board when they're already on the municipal library board. So those seats are taken, but there are 3 wildcard seats. You do have to be appointed by the county executive. And I don't know how that would go. County Executive Cruiser was very, very particular about who he put on that board for good reason. So we had very, very supportive board at that time. Beyond that, you guys are doing it. I love it when people stand up and say good things about the library, but even more than that, you are so thoughtful about your statements. All the statements at the last supervisor meeting, where they were trying to build the walls in the library, every single one of the speeches was so unique from a different perspective. They all brought up great points, and I was like taking notes. I'm like, wow, that was really great. Really, really thoughtful. You present yourself as not just angry people with nothing to say, but, really intelligent, good reasoning as to why we need an open and free libraries. So that you are already doing it, but getting on a library board is hugely helpful, because those are the people that are making the decisions. Oh, you can run for county supervisor. if you like to suffer, you know, hey.
Well, we have a bunch of people doing that, which is why we have such a small crowd tonight, because
Oh,
we have
thank
some of
God
our
for them. Yes.
some of our candidates who are running are having events tonight, and
Oh,
so
good.
yeah,
Good
there's
luck.
quite a few events. But I don't know if anyone else has any other questions for Barbara before we let her go. I'll just see one more second. I don't see any more, but I really want to thank you so much for doing this with us. And like I said, I know we were a very small audience tonight, but I can assure you this is gonna hopefully someone will help me edit out the beginning when I couldn't figure out what was going on. But this will be posted, and I know that a lot of our people really wanted to see it. They just couldn't attend tonight, but and one of our participants says it was really good, and to thank you. So we are very happy for everything you do. We love our public libraries. We will always be happy to stand up and defend them. They really, really public education and public libraries are the cornerstone of our democracy, and we really need both of them.
Thank you for recognizing that and all your support. We couldn't do it without you guys.
So thank you. Have a good evening, and we will see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye, everyone.